Well, hi, everybody, and welcome back to the PCOS Revolution Podcast. I hope you've had a wonderful week, and I'm very excited to share a special guest today who actually has her own podcast that we will share that information with you later on in the show. But her name is Adrienne Nolan-Smith, and she actually is a health advocate and blogger as well as podcaster, and she herself was diagnosed with Lyme disease when she was 11. And her conventional doctor prescribed antibiotics, but they didn't work. And her mother was then told there was no other option. So 2 years and multiple integrative therapies later, Adrienne was Lyme-free. Now, over the years, other health issues came up, and each time it became clear that conventional doctors had tools to treat her symptoms, but they never got to the root of the problems, nor did they really try to cure them. In 2010, Adrienne lost her mother to suicide while she was on antipsychotic and antidepressant medications to treat schizoaffective disorder. At that point, Adrienne knew she needed to completely switch careers and began working for a healthcare and technology company, hoping to fix the system from the inside. After several years working with hospitals, she realized that until wellness is a standard of care, the current chronic disease crisis would only continue to rise. And she also realized that until people demand wellness from their doctors, their brands, their employers, their governments, and ultimately themselves, nothing will change. And that's so true. I wholeheartedly agree. Now, Adrienne founded WellBe to facilitate this change by helping you get and stay well and demanding a system that supports you in this endeavor. Adrienne received her BA from Johns Hopkins University, her MBA from the Kellogg School at Northwestern University, and is a board-certified patient advocate. She lives in New York City, where she was born and raised, and she gets well with acupuncture, Chinese herbs, and eating mostly clean, real food. Welcome, Adrienne, to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. This is great.
I love your blog. We will definitely link to that. But this is, it looks like definitely such a wonderful resource for people that are even, with PCOS, without PCOS, but just wanting to learn about how to get healthy. You actually have many trainings in there, and also your podcast. So I know that this is a podcast for PCOS. So we didn't talk about that in your intro, but you had amenorrhea, which for those of you listening who don't know, it's basically an absence of your cycle, your menstrual cycle, for a prolonged period of time. So tell me about what happened with that, and also we'll get into kind of the treatment that you had and that sort of thing, because I know that it can look a lot like PCOS.
Yeah, absolutely. So I went to college. As you mentioned, I moved to Baltimore from New York, where I'm from. And about 6 months after being there, my period stopped. And it had been normal, coming probably an average of every 30 days since I was, 12 or 13. And so this was really unusual and strange. And so after about 6 months, I started to get pretty worried and started to try to research. And you mentioned I had this Lyme experience, but since I was about 13, I really hadn't had many other major health issues. So I kind of hadn't gone back into this conventional healthcare world where you're going to all these different kinds of doctors and specialists trying to find answers. So I was kind of reminded about how terrible that process is. But I was going to, doctor after doctor, endocrinologist, gynecologist, taking blood tests, doing all that stuff. And I was lucky enough, because I was at Johns Hopkins, to go to some, really good Hopkins doctors, but still it actually wasn't, providing any answers. And all of them said to me, we don't see anything particularly wrong with you in your blood work. Just it's probably stress, or maybe you lost weight or this or that. And I was like, I didn't lose any weight. I showed them, I'd steadily gained a little bit of weight having been at college. I also, as far as times in my life that I'd been really stressed, like college was pretty fun. I was, my parents had been getting divorced and my mom's mental health had started to decline, but college was kind of a nice escape for me. So I was able to just kind of put all of that aside and make great friends and have fun. And so I kind of didn't believe that that was the answer, because I was not feeling particularly stressed. And So I kept going, and they all told me to take the birth control pill. That was like, nothing's wrong with you. Here's a birth control pill. It was like just the standard treatment. And for all of them, I had done enough research to say, look, no, this is a synthetic hormone. Who knows what other side effects this is going to have on my body? And also, it's not getting to the root of the problem. Like, I was able to get, as a female, my natural period for 7 years, and now for like 6 years, and now I'm not. So clearly my body is trying to tell me that something is wrong, and I want to figure out what's wrong. And if I take the birth control pill, I not only could create other issues, but I'm going to mask whatever is wrong, because I'm going to have this fake period created, and it will continue to get worse until whenever I go off of it, it could be a full-blown, who knows, other diagnosis, or ovarian cancer or whatever, who knows. And so I said no to all of that. Actually, finally, one of the doctors, out of spite, I think I took the birth control pill for 2 or 3 months just to say, like, this won't get it back naturally. Trust me. They kept saying, oh no, yes, you're right about it's not going to get to the root cause, and it's unnatural, but it'll kickstart your natural one. They kept saying. I said, I don't believe you, but okay, I'll try it. So I think 2 or 3 months, and then going off of it, sure enough, didn't get it for several more months. So at, I think, about 1.5 years of not having it, my father was pretty worried, and he found me a naturopath, because a lot of my Lyme experience had been in the integrative and functional, well, there was no functional medicine world there. So the integrative and holistic, or whatever we want to call it, medicine world, that was really what got me better, were all of these, different therapies that were not antibiotics, because it was too late, I think, for the antibiotics to work. So my family had grown familiar with this other side of medicine, this other world. So he thought, well, look, you've exhausted all these resources in the conventional healthcare system. All these doctors are saying the exact same thing. They're hardly doing any work to try to get to the root cause. They're spending, 5 or 10 minutes with you. And let's go to this naturopath. So she was in New York, and I came home for the summer between my sophomore and junior year of college. And she looked at my blood work so differently. It was wild. I mean, we spent 45 minutes to an hour just going through it line by line and understanding how all of these different things, from micronutrient deficiencies to certain indications of having maybe parasites or fungus, to my thyroid, which I had never gotten a full thyroid panel, and seen that I had hypothyroidism, and all these different things were quite connected. And I was also having some GI problems when I was at college, which was really funny. I went through a phase, I think it was my I don't remember exactly when, but I was chewing a lot of gum, and it all had fake sugar in it. And I didn't really make the connection, but I was having a lot of constipation issues, a lot of like smelly gas issues. Just, it was weird to me. But, I think a lot of girls just kind of deal with this stuff. They just kind of manage. And I mean, I remember the stuff I used to do to be able to go to the bathroom. It was like 7-step process with like chlorophyll and this and that. And I began to just think that was normal. That's what you had to do to go to the bathroom. And now looking back, I'm like, that was insane. Like, this is a very normal human process. You shouldn't have to go to so much work to do it, And so lo and behold, she showed me how the connection between my thyroid and my gut troubles, and I include the parasites and fungus and stuff in there because I studied abroad in China when I was 16. Mm-hmm. And as anybody knows who's ever gone to China, there's a lot of issues for Westerners, especially with like, what we call China belly, because there's a lot of issues with their water. And also just there's a very different set of bacteria for their microbiomes. And so Westerners are like, usually really thrown for a loop with their guts. So
that's putting it nicely.
Yeah. And so I'm sure, it was a long time ago. It was, maybe over 50, maybe 17 years ago, 18 years ago, that I was this time that I'm talking about when I went to study abroad there when I was a junior in high school for 4 months. But I do remember, having quite a bit of stomach things here and there. And also then probably taking Cipro, which of course I thought was like candy. Even everything I knew about my Lyme experience and the natural therapies that had helped me, nobody really talked about at that time that it wasn't okay to take antibiotics all the time. Like we didn't talk about it. And so I always had tons of Cipro on hand for any kind of GI issue in China. And I'm sure that just wreaked havoc because, sure enough, this whole period issue started about, let's say a year and a half after I got back. But that's enough time to kind of let bad bacteria take hold if you've wiped out all the good and bad bacteria through all these different courses of antibiotics. So my thyroid, my gut sort of issues, both with like how much fake sugar I was eating, which does a lot of damage to your gut, as well as these parasin funguses and things I had picked up in China, and wiping out all the good bacteria with my antibiotics, over antibioticing myself, and then couple that with this, or rather, both of these things really playing into your hormones and your hormones not being balanced. And so what she was able to see was I was really not making or secreting enough testosterone, and you need both estrogen and testosterone to have your menstrual cycle. And so things were just like really out of whack. And so on one hand, I remember being like a little frustrated because there wasn't a silver bullet, like a one thing that was why I lost my period. It was a lot more, it just showed how interconnected all of these different systems in my body were, and how it was just such a delicate balance. And if you messed up one, you mess with your gut, then your hormones spiral. Or if you have this underlying thyroid condition, that affects your gut, and then your hormones can spiral. So I realized how connected everything was. And so we started doing this protocol of Chinese herbs by capsules, a ton of supplements based on the micronutrient deficiency she was seeing in my blood work, and then radically changing my diet. This was, in 2006 was when I started with her. So we didn't call it gluten-free, but I wasn't allowed to eat wheat, no sugar because the sugar fed the fungus. And no processed foods, because all bad bacteria loves processed foods. And then I think she really didn't stipulate anything regarding dairy or meat intake. And I just remember that one of her other major issues was about raw food. So I had to stop eating raw food out that I didn't wash myself. So no sushi. I haven't had sushi in, since 2006, as far as, raw fish. And even, I was a college girl. What do college girls do? We eat salads constantly, right? We think we're going to get fat otherwise. And yet I had to completely change my diet, and I couldn't eat a salad unless I made it myself. And I couldn't eat, like fruit at a restaurant. I had to, unless I washed it myself. So it was a huge adjustment. And sure, I was like, what? This doesn't make any sense. But I learned how to do it, and I didn't get fat. It was fine. Everything was, fine with my body. And sure enough, doing this diet protocol with the Chinese herbs, the supplements, and a little bit of acupuncture when I was in New York to see her, but that wasn't that often. She said, do this for 6 months and your, period will come back. And 6 months and a day later, it did. It was like so right on the time. And I remember what was cool was she was using some Chinese herbs that were, meant for kind of fertility and menstrual cycle issues. And we just chose the moon cycle to, create a new period because my body forgot, when to do it. And it had been so long since the last one. And so it was a full moon.
Very cool. Mm-hmm.
And I thought that was pretty neat. Yeah, it's been completely normal ever since. And by normal, I mean, it comes, every 28 to 32 days, every month. And, yeah, that was 13 years ago. So it was a huge eye opener for me, both on the conventional healthcare side, how few of those very notable doctors that I had to skip waiting lists to get in to see really cared at all about finding out the root cause of what might be going on, and how many of them, threw birth control at me. And had I taken their advice and taken it for years and just assumed that, oh, I'm getting this fake period, this is good enough. Like those thyroid issues, those parasites, fungus issues, gut issues, all of these things would have gotten worse and worse and worse without, me intervening and changing my lifestyle in a certain way and kind of doing a protocol to kill off the bad and strengthen the good. And I don't know where I would be now, if I had stayed on a long time, or say I'd stayed off until my, mid 30s or something, and then wanted to get pregnant and couldn't. There's just so many things that could have gone differently had I really listened to them. And so I'm, really glad that I didn't. But anyway, that's my story with amenorrhea.
Well, that's so true. And I think, it's kind of hard because I know that the medical system is not set up to spend as much time with a patient as a naturopath would or an acupuncturist would. Really, reading everything line by line, like you said, they pretty much, like you said, they have 5 or 10 minutes. And so what can you do in 5 or 10 minutes? It's really just write a prescription instead of, going in a little deeper. It takes a lot of work. And I think that more and more we're seeing that there's been a shift, for sure since then. And it's a similar experience where, I had birth control thrown at me, but why do you want to induce a pill bleed? It's not really even a period, what does it really solve? I think it kind of gets people out the door. And unfortunately, and it's really up to you as a woman to actually start to research like you did. And, I think even you had all the greatest, like you said, healthcare facilities and providers, but sometimes it's just a matter of finding what works for you. And that's so true with, birth control would have probably suppressed certain things, but also aggravated a lot of other things, as we know.
Yeah.
Including inflammation. So now, where are you now as far as with the Lyme and with, the autoimmune issues?
So I have not, I think that the more I learn, the more I think that Lyme, first of all, you always test positive for a screener test for Lyme if you've ever been exposed to it, never had it. So that's something that, I'll always have. But then when they do the further test, they can see that it's, no longer active, which is good. But I continue to get tested every year because I still live in New England. And so I'm still exposed to Lyme every summer. And so it's just a lot easier to treat. Antibiotics do generally work for people who find, a tick bite or whatever. If you can actually see the bullseye or whatever, like it's still in a part of the system where antibiotics could kill it. It's only when it's been in there long enough. It's a brilliant organism. It morphs into different forms. It goes into different systems. And that's why it's so hard to treat with antibiotics after, a few months. So I don't have acute issues with Lyme, but I think Lyme always affects you in some way. Just in the, I have a hypothyroid, Hashimoto's, back and forth type of thing. And it's really I think most medical providers would say it's just Hashimoto's. It doesn't go back and forth. But the reason I say that is because my thyroid antibodies go up and down and have my whole, like since I started seeing that naturopath in 2006, she's always done, 1 to 2 thyroid panels a year for me. And so she has, 13 years of data showing that my antibodies have gone from, none to 30 to 50 to 200 to 300. I think the highest I've seen it was maybe like 380. So it's never, I mean, there are some people that have them in the thousands. So I feel very lucky that mine, doesn't, hadn't gone in that crazy a direction. But certainly, most providers would say that if you have any thyroid antibodies, you have Hashimoto's. So in that case, I have Hashimoto's. But this up and down indicates that my body's able to kind of get a hold of it when I'm really taking care of my gut and myself and reducing those antibodies. And then at certain times in my life where I'm either experiencing great stress or just not taking as good care of myself, or traveling a lot or whatever it might be, those antibodies go up. So yeah, that's where I am right now. So not luckily struggling with Lyme anymore, no amenorrhea issues, but this thyroid issue persists, and it's very connected to, how I take care of myself, both physically and, mentally and emotionally, because stress and cortisol plays a huge role in thyroid issues, especially Hashimoto's, because of the adrenal fatigue and all of that. So it's been a real eye opener to me that, you can't supplement and, Chinese herb your way into perfect health. If you have an autoimmune condition, you really also have to take care of your stress management skills and your, just your internal conversations with yourself. I think they have, if they're creating inflammation in that way, like, it doesn't matter, if you're doing everything else right, there's still inflammation happening in your body.
So self-care plays a role in so many things, and over we see that, the patients that get better faster are the ones that are implementing the self-care, for sure. And not that it's perfect and it'll never be 100%, but 80-20 is always a good thing, at least. And
Yeah.
and with the thyroid, issue coming up, there's a article that was written in Scientifica. It was in 2016, and it was about how the prevalence of autoimmune disorders are higher in women with PCOS. And in fact, it was, saying that every woman with PCOS should have a full thyroid panel. And like you said, you didn't have a period and they still didn't do a complete thyroid panel, which blows my mind too, because the first thing you think of if you have irregular cycles is, well, yeah, let's check the thyroid first, because if we don't do that, then we can't rule that out. And if you have thyroid issues, you definitely could have irregular cycles or issues getting pregnant. So both hypo and hyperthyroidism can lead to miscarriages and all kinds of things. So that's, pretty crazy that, they didn't check it. And then when you did check it, there it is. You could have a normal TSH and have thyroid antibodies present.
Right. So that's probably what, happened, was that the conventional doctors I was seeing didn't see something up with the TSH, and then didn't check, further, or maybe even, it was such a different time. I'm not sure they even really did TSH. Like, I'm not sure, but it was just shocking to me, because once this naturopath did my full thyroid panel, TSH was an issue, antibodies were an issue, like these all came up, and it somehow just totally escaped the medical establishment that I had been, putting my faith in before that.
And did they recommend any medication for your thyroid, or once you found that out, or what have you been doing?
I take Naturopathic now. And because my thyroid condition has always been treated by this naturopath rather than a conventional MD, the Naturopathic and natural, thyroid medication was always an option. I think had my thyroid issues been discovered by a conventional MD, they may have tried to put me on Synthroid a long time ago, but I now know enough about Synthroid. I have filmed a health recovery story for my platform, WellBe, of a girl who had a misdiagnosed bipolar disorder, and it turned out to be just a toxic drug reaction to Synthroid.
Wow.
So I'm trying my hardest to do everything I can to avoid going on Synthroid, and for the time being, the Naturopathic, has worked. I just have to be quite consistent with it, and I take, half a grain in the morning and half a grain in the afternoon to try to dose it better. So conventional doctors will say that, oh, Synthroid is better because it's easier to dose because it's synthetic, so it's so specific. Whereas Armor and Naturothroid and some of these other ones, I think WP Thyroid, they're all derived from pig thyroid. So the good part of that is that they're bioidentifiable to the human body. They see it as something that exists in nature rather than a drug, which doesn't exist in nature because it's a chemical creation. But the bad part of it is that, pig thyroids are slightly different, right, than human thyroid. So when it comes in, it doesn't always have the exact effect that you could predict with a drug. So hence why I try to, take half in the morning, half in the afternoon to just make sure that, it's throughout the day, it's being absorbed the same way. So, that's what I've been doing. I would, it's a dream of mine, and I think it should be completely possible, to take no thyroid medication at some point. Even though, my naturopath says, your mom has had a low thyroid before she died. My father has a low thyroid, like my brothers, we all see the same woman. So she knows. And I said to her, just a few weeks ago, like, I'm sorry, I don't care. Like I've seen people through my work with WellBe who have reversed their Hashimoto's, and it's very hard and it takes a lot of work and being very strict with your diet and your lifestyle, but it is possible. And I'd really like to make that happen, even if it's a few years from now. I think it's something I should really work towards.
Definitely. I mean, it's possible. I know. And we just added a autoimmune protocol, a meal plan to our PCOS Revolution portal for, because of this reason. It's because we kept noticing through our patients too, testing them, that so many women with PCOS were coming back with positive antibodies. And in fact, like there's an article about classifying PCOS as an autoimmune condition. So I think that we're finding out the autoimmune issues are kind of creeping up more and more. 80% of autoimmune issues are in women. And there's a theory about because of the of having a placenta, that the placenta actually helped us regulate our immune system. But yet, if that was based on the fact that you had 6, 7, or 8 children, so you were pregnant for a long period of time back in the day, many years ago, and now we don't have the placenta for that long. So maybe we have, no children, or 1 or 2, 3 children. There's not a whole lot of years that we're actually exposed to our placenta. So I felt that was a very interesting theory, and as to why it's mostly predominantly women who have this. And I think that the more we learn about the immune system, the more that's going to come out of this, but we can't ignore it anymore. And, I think that the work you're doing is great because we're going to be unfortunately seeing more and more of this, and we need to find better solutions than just Band-Aids for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I hadn't heard that theory before. That's very interesting. I think a lot about why we have so much autoimmunity right now, for my work, as you mentioned, and from the stories that I tell, there's so many of them are women and so many of them are autoimmune stories. But I really believe that, it's basically like this toxic burden that's creeping in on all of our systems, from our food to our air and our water, and just confusing our body so much about what is actually a threat and what is not, because of this, gut health, being kind of some with C-sections and, lots of issues that mothers are having and carrying babies, and then the babies are getting them in utero. And then by the time they're exposed to the world and they're seeing, GMO peanuts and, this and that, their bodies are reacting in the most, bizarre way. And then it's just a lifetime of these different, false threats, as we say. And it must have, quite a bit to do with your hormones, because, women suffering so disproportionately from autoimmune conditions, it's not like men are not also experiencing pollution in food and water and air, et cetera. So why is it affecting women so much? And I think it comes down to this sort of, this ever-changing hormone situation that we have, and how connected hormones are to the gut. So I think it's so fascinating, and it's getting so much worse every day. especially American women. And so I think, like you said, we should all sort of, I think, be telling most girls to be adopting somewhat of an autoimmune protocol, right? From just as a safeguard, to make sure that they don't develop as they go through puberty these different conditions like PCOS or, just amenorrhea, which, by the way, amenorrhea and I think PCOS are both just conditions that are not at all related to the root cause of what causes them, right? You have a lot of cysts on your ovaries, or you aren't getting your period, but neither of them explain why they're happening. They're just sort of, it's like restless leg syndrome. Like, yeah, but why is your leg restless? Or IBS, same thing. What's irritating your bowel, which I always think is pretty like comical that people just say, oh, I have IBS, without ever asking like, well, what is irritating my bowel? Like, that's not a sufficient answer from a doctor. And yet that's the answer that a lot of us take, and just, oh, that's just what I have. So a lot of what I try to work on is helping people to understand that you have to keep fighting for a root cause. Like, until you have it, or until you have a pretty good idea of what it can be and are working towards healing it. Like, don't just take whatever's told to you as, the final answer, because it doesn't explain anything about why it's happening. And you can reverse things once you know what you're dealing with and why, so I think for whether it's amenorrhea, PCOS, like, even if the answer is complicated and I had so many different components of what my issues were, at least someone who was trying to explain how these different things in my blood work were actually causing me to not have a period, and we could work on those. But I think until you do that, you're kind of just a little lost.
For sure. And I think what you're saying is so true. Like, don't give up. Like, do not get frustrated. I know it's really hard, especially when you're feeling like you're losing trust in your own body. But it's so important to, keep going and find the solution somewhere like you did, and know that it's totally possible to start reversing a lot of this too. I feel like it's totally possible, otherwise wouldn't be doing this podcast, to reverse PCOS, even though everyone says, no, it's not curable. Well, I've been in remission 20 years. I have patients who have never seen one single symptom of PCOS come back. I totally believe it's possible. But I think it does take work, like you said, so nothing comes easy. But the alternative, is masking the symptoms and waiting for other things to kind of creep up that are not so pleasant. So,
Testing fate. That's what I call it. Just when you mask for long enough, like, what are you sort of waiting for? Like the other shoe to drop. Like, so. But I think, in my own experience, we all get tired of fighting, right? And so there's going to be lulls in the process where you're just like going through a hard time with something in, work or family or whatever, and you're not able to really attack the problem with, rigorous amount of research and dedication to lifestyle changes and self-care and food and all these things that we know are so important, or keeping up with your supplements or whatever it is. But then you just have to get back up on that horse. It's like, I know when I'm in a little couple of weeks or even couple of months of falling off track, but I know I'm going to get back on that horse. I'm going to keep fighting it. I'm going to, right now my goal is, to get, as I said, these thyroid antibodies to 0. But before, 13 years ago was definitely to get my regular period back. And it's okay to have those lulls, to see that you're going through a time when you just can't focus on it as much as you'd like to. And like I said, whether that's a couple of weeks or a couple of months, but as long as you realize that that goal is still important to actually heal and not just manage, I think that's the most important thing. So just everyone, don't give up, keep trying, but don't beat yourself up if you have a little bit of a lull where you can't make it, a top priority.
For sure. It's a marathon, not a sprint, right?
Exactly.
Oh, this is
I've learned that so many, it's like Lyme, and then, oh, that's better. I'm all better. And then, 5-6 years later, issues crept up with, hormonal stuff and gut stuff in college. And then, oh, I'm fine. And then, my thyroid kind of progressively kind of getting worse as here I am in my, early 30s, and now having to sort of focus on that. So who knows what, my 40s will bring, whatever, but I think it's a dedication to listening to your body, to not ignoring symptoms, to keeping up that diet and lifestyle, which we know is the key to all healing and all prevention, and not beating yourself up when certain parts of your life or times in your life you can't be as good as you always are. So there's that too. I think the negativity, as we were talking about earlier, inside your head, or just I read somewhere, somebody quoted, every single organ in your body hears what you're saying to yourself in your head. So if that conversation is negative, then you're creating inflammation all over your body. Excuse me. So there's, a lot that we can be doing to reduce inflammation with, what we eat and supplements that we take and healing herbs and self-care and lifestyle changes. But if that is still, not a healthy, positive thing, then, it's still going to affect you. So I think that's something I've also learned in my 30s, is it's not all just physical and what I'm eating. I also have to, be kind to myself.
Well, you are fabulous with your work. Please keep it up, and we need you out there. And I really suggest that everybody listening check out Adrienne's blog and her podcast. Can you tell our listeners how to find you?
Sure. And thank you for those very sweet words. So my company is called WellBe, but it's Get WellBe is the URL, our website. So, GetWellbe, getwellbe.com, and then at GetWellbe on all of our different social channels. And then you can search Get WellBe in the podcast app, and you can find the WellBe podcast there. So I'm most active, I would say, on, Instagram, Facebook. Our weekly newsletter is really the best place to interact with us. So you can easily sign up for that on the website. And then, of course, as I mentioned, the WellBe podcast as well.
Very cool. Thank you so much, Adrienne, for being on today. And I hope all of you have enjoyed this as much as I have and have learned a whole lot. So we will look forward to looking into your blogs and your podcast. And I'll see all of you guys next week. Have a great week and take care of yourself. Bye-bye.
Thank you.